Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tim Wichter. I'm the Senior Director of Foundation Relations in University Advancement, and I'm happy to be here today to talk a little bit about how to work with the foundation community, some thoughts on the various types of foundations, and some opportunities that might be of interest to you and your colleagues. So a little bit about what my office is and what we do. We're mainly responsible for an overall plan, foundation relations plan for the university, looking mainly at the university level relationship with major foundations, both nationally and within the state of Michigan. We do a lot of work with the president and provost and making connections for them with the leadership of these major foundations to keep that university level relationship active. We also identify opportunities down a level with the programming staff and bring those opportunities back to campus for conversations with faculty members such as you. We also try to coordinate campus visits when possible for programming staff as well as leadership of the foundations. This is often harder to do than what it may seem, because a lot of these foundation program officers, as you know, are quite busy. They travel extensively. So getting them to campus is very challenging at times. But we have been successful over the years in bringing them here, and we've also been successful in going out and meeting with them at their headquarters. We also provide advice and guidance on potential foundation prospects for university-wide initiatives, as well as for faculty research, outreach projects, and other types of initiatives. We try to identify funding opportunities from various foundations and disseminate them. This is a little bit of a challenge. We don't have a very good vehicle right now for getting a lot of that information out. What we typically do at this point for research opportunities that are coming down the pike from the foundation community, we will tend to forward those to your associate deans for research in the colleges and hope that they will get them down to department chairs and faculty members. If we know faculty members are working in a particular space and an RFP is issued, we will send the RFP directly to those faculty members. And finally, we pursue these goals from the central office in University Advancement Foundation Relations. We have 4 people in that office. We also have dedicated foundation and corporate people in the College of Agricultural and Natural Resources, Engineering, International Studies and Programs, and Business. So if you're in any of those colleges, those individuals would be your point of contact for any conversations for foundation opportunities, and then they would liaise back with our central office in the Central Office of Foundation Relations for continued dialogue. A few statistics on foundations. Worldwide, there's a little bit more than 260,000 foundations out there, 86,000 in the United States, about 2,200 in the state of Michigan. So there's a lot of them out there. There's a lot of opportunity, okay? And the assets, about $890 billion, with expenditures of approximately $79.8 billion for U.S. foundations. For the U.S. foundations, the 2 broad areas that they typically fund the most are education and health. And just a statistic closer to home, last year MSU received about $56.7 million in funding from foundations. And we've averaged over the last 5 years about $43 million annually from foundations. The Kellogg Foundation has been our largest supporter to date at about $140 million, followed by the Gates Foundation at currently about $52 million. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I think it's important for you to know there are different types of foundations out there, and the different types of foundations, it might depend on your project, which foundation type you might want to approach. So I think just briefly looking at them might be helpful. So family foundations, these are typically created by a particular family. Often it's a husband and wife. Family members typically serve as the board members, and they're either instrumental in or are the sole deciders on the grants that are awarded. Their giving patterns tend to be tied to the interests of the family members. That's typically the schools they attended, communities where they reside. And they tend to be very small, informal organizations with no program staff. Family foundations are more likely than the other types of foundations to perhaps provide endowment funding, whereas the other foundations typically shy away from that type of funding. Another type of support from family foundations that's common are scholarships and fellowships. And if you're looking at a family foundation, again, I think you really need to understand the interests of the family to be able to interest them in potential funding opportunity. We often approach family foundations as we would approach individual donors, because as I said earlier, they tend to be a family, particularly maybe a husband and wife. So we will look at them more as an individual than as a family foundation in many respects. Operating foundations are interesting types of foundations. They typically do not make grants. They fund their own programs. However, many of them do seek outside partnerships. So we have been successful in getting some funding from some of these operating foundations over the years. It's a lot harder to do that because you have to be aligned with the programming that they are actually funding themselves. Clinton Foundation would be an example of an operating foundation. One that's not really classified as operating, but I see it more as an operating foundation, is the Pew Charitable Trusts. They used to be a grant-making organization quite a few years ago. They shifted, and they're really supporting their own programs, but we've been successful, a number of faculty members have been successful in partnering with them and garnering some support for their projects. Community foundations, they tend to serve a specific geographic community or region, focus mainly, if not exclusively, on local needs, community-focused projects. They're comprised of a large number of individual funds, and decisions are typically made by board members who represent the diversity of the community. We're very fortunate in the state of Michigan to have an extremely large number of community foundations, one I believe in every county. And the types of projects you would look at for a community foundation, again, are very localized in a particular region or particular county. Our MSU Extension offices have been very successful in garnering support from the Michigan Community Foundation simply because of the work they do in the various counties. Corporate foundations derive their grant-making funds from the corporations that usually bear their name. So Ford Motor Company Fund is an example. They tend to focus on educational, cultural, and social welfare needs of the communities in which their employees are located or which their headquarters are located. And often their interests, educational interests, are around the types of programs that will produce future employees for them. Legally, they're independent grant-making organizations, but they typically maintain very close ties to corporate entities. And they often exist to enhance the corporate image of corporations that are providing funding for them. The main type of foundation that I want to focus on today, however, are independent foundations. These are the big national general purpose foundations like Rockefeller, Ford, and others of that ilk. They're typically large, complex, multifaceted, professionally managed, have very well-defined program areas. So if you're working with a large foundation like Ford or MacArthur or Gates that have anywhere from 3 to maybe 10 defined program areas, it's often like working with 10 different foundations within one foundation because of the specificity of the various programming areas. What I have found over the years is that a lot of the program areas at these foundations are becoming much more interconnected, and they're looking at how they can collaborate, which is a trend I'll talk about in a slide a bit farther along in the program. The program staff at these foundations are often experts in their field. Most of them typically have their PhDs. So they're very well knowledgeable in the space that they're leading at the foundation. They tend to know the top academics and researchers. And they often use them as consultants and for program refreshes and strategy refreshes. So a lot of times what we have found is that we've had a number of faculty members that have been called upon by the foundation community to help them the foundation think about where a particular program area might want to evolve into in the next 4 or 5 years. For example, the Gates Foundation, we had somebody who was tapped to help think about their agricultural development program and what that might look like over the next 5 years. So the more we can position ourselves to do that type of work, the better position we're going to be in the long run to procure funding from the foundations, acting in kind of a consultative role in helping them think about their strategy in the future. These types of foundations typically are interested in national or international level projects. You probably wouldn't go to one of these foundations for a more regional or localized opportunity that you're seeking funding for. They also tend to look at large impact. a large impact in the number of individuals they're impacting, the scale, how well would you be able to scale this program to other regions or other countries, and can it serve as a model for other organizations or other regions and areas? And very importantly, what's the capacity to be self-sustaining? Because most of these foundations are not interested in providing year upon year annual support. So in most of the grant proposals you'll be writing, you're going to want to focus on what is the sustainability of the project or the program that you are proposing. For example, will it eventually be institutionalized as part of your department's budget? Those types of things. A lot of what I've been seeing, and I've been doing this for about 25 years, is a shift in how the foundations are approaching the proposals they're inviting. It used to be that you could really approach these foundations with kind of a cold proposal and it would be given consideration. Those days are becoming much more infrequent, I would say. Many of these foundations are sourcing their own proposals. They're not accepting unsolicited proposals. Many of them moving to RFP processes, which makes it a little more challenging for us to kind of break into that space. I'll talk a bit about how we might be able to do that in another slide. But just know that it's becoming a little more challenging just to submit a cold proposal without being invited to submit. Many of these foundations engage in co-creation processes. For example, if you are invited to submit a proposal, the Gates Foundation does this quite frequently. They will actually, that program officer will actually work with you and help shape that proposal so that it presents the best possible proposal for the foundation, because the program officer is also being evaluated on the grant proposals that he or she is bringing into the foundation and taking to the board. So he or she wants to make sure that whatever they're bringing to the board is of something that's in line with what the foundation's interests are and has a pretty good chance of being considered by the board. So a lot of times you will be working very closely with program staff in kind of co-creating these proposals. And another very important fact is that many of these these foundations offer annual research awards and competitions. And this is going to be the bulk of my conversation. This is an area that I think we as a university need to be doing more in. These awards and competitions come up on an annual basis, and many of them in the past were institutionally limited. Quite a few still are, but many of them have moved away from institutionally limited to open access. So we can submit as many proposals as we want to quite a few of these. So what does the foundation landscape currently look like? Well, as you're probably aware, there's a significant number of new foundations that are emerging. And many of these are coming out of the Silicon Valley, high net worth individuals, tech industry. And they're substantially different than the traditional legacy foundations in structure, strategic focus, and their envisioned impact. So I think what we're seeing is, again, as I said earlier, these types of foundations are looking for short-term impact, impacting large numbers of individuals or communities. And I think that's a change and kind of a transition away from where many of these legacy foundations had been. That being said, there are quite a few legacy foundations, such as the Rockefeller Foundation, that are trying, I think, to transition into this type of space. And I think, will they be successful? I don't know. But I've seen a lot of foundations trying to play in this space, the big legacy foundations. And a lot of them are also moving toward a strong social justice focus in their programming. Ford Foundation is probably the best example of that. When Darren Walker took over as president of the Ford Foundation, he made a concerted effort to really move their programming to focus almost exclusively on social justice, which was a big shift from where the Ford Foundation had been. And that makes it a bit more challenging, I think, for universities to play in that space. That's not to say we are not going to be successful, but I think it's just a different mindset, and it would be different types of programming that the foundation would be interested in, perhaps than what they had been previously. Another trend that we're seeing are mega grants are on the rise. And this, I believe, has been spurred in the last few years by the MacArthur Foundation's $100 million opportunity to solve a world problem. Since that initiative was initiated three and a half years ago, we've seen quite a few foundations moving into this space with these kind of big bet opportunities, $10 million prize opportunities, competitions. And a lot of what they're focusing on there is not really research. It's on implementation of projects that organizations really have been working on for a considerable amount of time and are at a point where a huge infusion of funding could really move that project forward to a massive scale. So I think that's what a lot of these prizes and competitions are looking for. And that is a lot of implementation. So again, how do we as a university play in that space? I think a lot of what we would need to be looking for is what type of partnerships do we have on the ground, implementing partners that can help us take the research that we've done and kind of move that forward on the ground. So that's a big shift, I think, in the foundation landscape. Most of them are becoming much more multidisciplinary, and multi-partner collaborations are certainly things that they are looking for. So I think, again, in the future, to be successful, I think we're really going to have to look at multi-partnerships, not only within the university, among colleges, but partnerships with other universities, or as I said earlier, implementing partners, depending on the type of project or program you're looking for funding. And more, the types of organizations that are getting funding from these foundations are not universities. They're NGOs, they're advocacy groups, they're community-based organizations, implementing partners, and in particular, intermediary organizations that are re-granting the funds that are out there. So again, partnerships, I think, are going to be critical going forward. And a lot of what we might see in the future are these types of organizations that are getting significant grants and us partnering with them in some aspect, and us perhaps being a subcontract to one of these organizations rather than getting funding directly to us. Now, that being said, that's not to negate us going to these foundations for our individual research. We're certainly going to be able to do that, and they're certainly going to be able to fund that. But I think the bigger trends that we're seeing are these types of things. I think we just need to be cognizant of that as we move forward. The other trend is they're moving toward fewer but larger grants. Again, these big mega grant type of scenarios. And finally, probably most of you are aware of this, but I think it's important to point out that most foundations don't support indirect costs. And if they do, it's at a very minimal level, maybe up to 15%. So that is something I think you need to keep in mind as you're looking for foundation support as well. So how do you connect with these larger foundations? Well, as I said earlier, many of them issue RFPs, so I think it's very important that you sign up for any mailing lists that these foundations have so that you're kept up to date when RFPs are issued, because they do come out on a frequent basis. And when they do, we try to push them out as much as we can from our office. And many foundations have moved to initial letter of inquiry rather than a full proposal. I think this was a great move because I think it saves everybody a lot of time, particularly the researchers who don't necessarily need to spend a lot of time pulling together a major proposal. They can pull together a 3-page letter of inquiry and get feedback from the foundation and perhaps be invited to submit a proposal and then spend the time writing that proposal. So I think this has been a very good approach, and it's been very well received, I think, from the university community. Many foundations, as you probably see on their websites, don't accept unsolicited proposals. As I said earlier, many of them are starting to source their own proposals and their own researchers. So how do you get on the radar screen there? What we've tried to do is, and many of these foundation program officers, even though it says unsolicited, they are still often receptive to a quick phone conversation or an email exchange. So we've been very successful. If you have a project that you're seeking funding for and the foundation you're looking at says no unsolicited proposals, it's often fine to just jot down maybe a paragraph of what the research project is or what the project is, and we can identify the program officer to send that to and ask, what's your thought on this? Do you think this is something the foundation would have an interest in? And that has often led to the foundation program officer saying, this is interesting. I'd like to have a conversation with you, the faculty member, about this. So I don't think necessarily if it says not accepting unsolicited proposals, there's no opportunity to connect with them. By far, the best way to get on the radar screen of these foundations is the last point here. And I hear this again and again from the foundations that I visit on a regular basis. The best way is for you as faculty members to be present at symposia and colloquia that foundation program officers are either presenting at, or they're keynoting, or they're in attendance. And you are presenting your research. That's how they really get to know what your research is, what you're working on. And it's also a great opportunity for you to make connections. The other thing that we've been successful in doing is if you are going to a major conference and you know somebody from, pick a foundation, Ford Foundation is going to be there, we may know that foundation program officer. So we may be able to, in advance of that conference, set up a side meeting for you with that program officer at the conference. So again, I think this is a critical piece. And I know it's not often productive to go to a lot of these conferences, but I do think it is one of the key ways that you will become better known to the foundation community and your research will become better known. So foundation awards and competitions. So in addition to these kind of big bet opportunities and the program grants that they offer, many of these national level foundations offer annual funding opportunities in foundation awards and competitions. So what are these? They are research focused. Most of them are annual. Some of them are every other year. Many of them have a very strong focus on early career faculty. Most have very specific eligibility requirements. And most are focused on the sciences, engineering, and medical disciplines. There are a few, not many, that focus on the humanities and social sciences, but the bulk of them are in the sciences, engineering, and medical disciplines. They are highly competitive, and many are institutionally limited and require nomination by the university. So those institutionally limited, there's a process on campus, and I believe Alyssa might talk about that in her presentation. But those institutionally limited would simply mean that the university can only submit one or perhaps two proposals, and the university needs to make a decision as to which one would go forward. So this is an overview of the major foundations that have annual awards and competitions. The ones that are highlighted in purple are, well, let me start, the ones that are in regular type, black type, are those foundations that are funding in the sciences, the medical areas, and engineering. The ones in purple, for example, the William T. Grant Foundation focuses on the social science and education. The Greenwall Foundation focuses on bioethics. Andrew W. Mellon Foundation is strictly humanities. Smith-Richardson, humanities, social sciences, education, and Whiting Foundation is humanities. So as you can see, there aren't that many that are in the social sciences and the humanities. So what I've done on the remaining slides, and I am not going to go through each one of those, but you have it on the slide, and hopefully you'll be able to see those after the presentation. What I've done, I've taken each of these foundations and just given you a high-level overview of what the various awards are for each of those foundations. So I'll just go through the first page here. So for example, on the Arnold and Mabel Beckman Foundation, they have two. The Beckman Young Investigator Program, which provides research support to the most promising young faculty members in the early stages of their academic careers in the chemical and life sciences, and the Beckman Postdoctoral Fellowships. These occur on an annual basis and typically around the same time frame every year. And you can go to the website and you can see when the deadlines are for these. A lot of these that are institutionally limited will be on the Vice President for Research and Innovation's website, the institutionally limited proposal website, which will have details on each of them as well as internal deadlines and the deadlines for submission. But this gives you an idea of how many are out there. And I think we as a university have not been overly active in pursuing a lot of these. And I think there's opportunity that faculty members should probably take a closer look at some of these and see if there might be some opportunity for the work that you're doing. For example, Damon Run Your Cancer Research Foundation. Again, these are very competitive, but they offer about 5 different awards and competitions each year, only one of which is institutionally limited if you're doing cancer research. Again, I've highlighted those that are institutionally limited. Keck Foundation. Keck Foundation is an interesting one. We have not been successful as a university in getting a Keck. We try every year. They are extremely difficult to get. And it's one of those strange foundations that it is a very kind of Byzantine process of applying for this. There's about 4 or 5 different steps one needs to go through. And really what they are looking for are projects that typical federal funding agencies will not touch. So it really needs to be out of the box type of opportunities that they're going to have an interest in. McKnight Foundation is really focused on neuroscience. Again, Mellon is humanities, social sciences. Packard Fellowships, and again, another very prestigious fellowship award. We got our first one a couple of years ago. You may recall seeing that. Jay Strader in physics and astronomy got a Packard Foundation award. Again, that's an institutionally limited, and Pew biomedical scholars are institutionally limited. And there are many others out there, but these are the major ones that I think you need to be aware of on an annual basis. And then I always like to close a presentation with this quote from Barton Gregorian, who's the president of the Carnegie Corporation of New York. Foundations function but as incubators, not as oxygen tanks. So we can't keep going back to the same foundation for the same program year after year after year. So I thank you, and I think we'll have questions at the end.
There was one question that came in on Zoom, just asking Tim on the foundation descriptions that many of those referred to folks as scientists, and yes, that does include engineering as well. So science didn't mean science specifically, it encompasses both of those. On Kyle's presentation, one of the things that we learned when academic analytics was here is that not only can you leverage that word cloud to find collaborators who may be inside or outside the university, but another nice way to use that word cloud and that list of people who look like you as far as a profile is that you can find out what type of awards you might be eligible for as well. So when you're talking about something that you may nominate a colleague for an award, you can go and look at your colleague's profile and then look at other people like them and then go look up their bio at their home university and see what awards they've won, which sort of gives you a good background around what you or your colleague might be eligible for as well. So in addition to looking at funding and what these people have received, you could also look at awards. It's a good way to find other people in very similar fields and see what they've maybe applied for.
Hi, thank you. I have a question for Tim. Is there a way to find out where the foundation money goes, that $53 million? Is it going to individual faculty, or then it's a lot of money, and I'm just kind of curious to see where the breakdown of where it goes.
So you can find a lot of that information on the OSP CGA website in their various search options. If you want to queue in, pick a foundation, and if you know a faculty member, you can queue in by faculty member, and you can see grants that have been awarded. That's probably the best way of finding out where some of these foundation grants are going.
And if you're in a college where there isn't a focused staff person, what as a faculty member in one of those, what do you do? I mean, I'm speaking from the College of Communication Arts and Science, where we are doing a lot of these, social activist oriented work on these multidisciplinary, the type of projects that you seem to suggest that foundations are funding. And personally, it's been frustrating that we don't really have the support to help us tap into these opportunities.
The best way, or the best person to talk to.
Yeah. Oh, I know what you're going to say.
I know what you. I know what I'm going to say. You know it, but that is what we highly recommend, because that It's the development officer in your college, and that person should be able to liaise with our office in the main foundation relations area and determine whether or not we should be brought in for a conversation. Now, that being said, as you probably know, we just came off a very big capital campaign, and the focus of your development officers in your college really has been on working with individuals and alumni, not with foundations and corporations, even though that should be part of their purview. So again, I do suggest that that is your first point of contact. You can feel free to reach out to me or one of my staff members. One of my associate directors is here with me today, Adam Kingston, and we can certainly see if we can chat with you about your area of research or your project and help you maybe determine what foundations might have an interest in supporting that. But part of our challenge being a centrally located office with only a very minimal staff, we're servicing the entire campus, the 17 colleges and all the units out there. And it's very hard for us to meet with every faculty member that wants to have a conversation. So we try to encourage the development directors that are within your college to really be that first point of contact to determine, first of all, are you far enough along with the thinking on the project and the initiative to be ready to have a conversation potentially with a foundation or to reach out to a foundation via email? Or if there's an opportunity, and if you are that far enough along, then to be able to connect that faculty member with one of us in the central office to take that a step farther. Those are the types of connections that your development staff probably would not be able to make. We would have to do that for you. But I again encourage you, that should be the first point of contact.